Hello, you two.
Hello.
Hello.
Can I introduce you to the new star of Newscast, Electioncast?
Yourself?
No, I'm famously modest, Laura. Jenny Leck.
Oh.
The real Jenny Leck.
I heard about this.
Yeah, she's from Manchester, and her name's actually Jenny Leckie, but her friends call her Jenny Leck, which means she's perfect as our part-time general election correspondent.
So I hired Jenny Leck the other day on Newscast, and I thought she sounds like a marvellous person. However, I also have quite a strong feeling that anyone's calling the general election Jenny Leck should be not allowed to do so.
You were wondering, in a new modern BBC, what kind of punishment is allowed?
Yes, exactly.
Without cancelling yourself.
Yes, exactly.
Oh, really? Because I heard the bosses are thinking of calling the election night programme Jenny Leck Nation Decides Election Night programme.
Yes.
That's really hilarious.
Okay. Anyway, Jenny Leck is going
with my name on it.
Well, that's a discussion for another day. But she's going global now because she was on Greg James' Radio 1 breakfast show the other day as well. And this is how it sounded.
Now, there's been a lot of chat about what we're going to call this general election, and...
So, Jenny Lex 2024.
Feels like Jenny Lex is sort of taking flight a bit.
We had platitudes, we had Cosy Lives, and now we have Jenny Leck.
Yeah, now the latest episode of Newscast have got involved and found someone called...
Who have we got on the line now?
Oh, hiya. My name's Jenny. And my surname is Leckie, and people do call me for short Jenny Leck.
Jenny Leck is on Newscast. So good to meet you.
Jenny Leck, there on the latest edition of Newscast, which you can listen to on BBC Sounds.
Now, are we making poor Jennifer Leckie? Yeah. Are we making Jennifer Leckie be interested in politics when really she's a person going about her business and has no intention, quite understandably, of paying attention to us wittering on?
What's hilarious though was when I met her on Newscast the other day there, I said, where are you on the scale of interest in politics from 1 to 10, where 1 is not interested at all, 10 is like Laura Kuenssberg, Chris Mason level. And she said, I'm a 1. But then in the course of the conversation, she went from 1 to 0. I was like, okay, this is going slightly in the wrong direction, but never mind.
Oh, I love that. But
Good of her to be so honest.
What's a very valid point, though, and political parties always talk about this, they know that really it's only in the sort of closing moments of a campaign that most normal people, but many people really tune in the sort of closing moments. So this is it's not a phony war, but this is definitely the campaign warm-up before it gets really, really massive.
Back to your theory about actually you don't need a lot of va-va-voom in the first 2 weeks. Necessarily, yes, it's important. I suppose the thing is, if you mess it up at the start, it's not the end of the world.
I also remember results when I look back, but also I remember John Prescott punching the guy who punched through a negative. I remember the events, the soapbox for John Major.
Duffygate.
Duffygate.
But what's interesting about the punch is I was reminded yesterday, that was actually the day Labour launched their manifesto. Does anyone remember the 2001 Labour manifesto? I mean, does anyone remember any manifesto is another question. But no, everyone remembers the punch, not the Tony Blair's manifesto launch.
Punch. I was talking about it this morning, actually, with some people who were on our show about their favourite campaigns. And Alan Johnson remembered a non-favourite moment where they were launching the Labour 2010 election campaign. And as Gordon Brown was doing so, there was literally a car crash in the venue just in front of them. Anyway, no one was hurt. No one was hurt, and plenty of other hilarious anecdotes on today's episode of Newscast.
Newscast from the BBC.
It's Paddy in the studio.
And Laura in the studio.
And Adam in the studio. And I've just realised I'm giving up my weekend to do some public service.
Well, here's why. This is my job, but I'll tell you what, Laura's scooped again. So we start with the reason why we're all tuning in, which is you've got Labour to make an announcement on tax.
So Rachel Reeves, Shadow Chancellor, has always wanted to keep her cards very, very close to her chest, apart from saying, I'll be careful with your money, I'll be careful with your money. And by the way, I'll be careful with your money. There's been a question about what they would do about tax, because the Tories have long said they won't really be careful with your money. They're just not telling you. They're secretly planning to put up taxes. But this morning, on the record, she ruled out increasing income tax. And that is quite a big and important moment in this campaign.
Well, let's start by listening.
We won't increase income tax or national insurance. In fact, we opposed the increases to national insurance when Rishi Sunak put those forward as Chancellor.
So that is a very expensive commitment. In other ways, that's a huge amount of money that she would not have to play with if she's lucky enough to become the Chancellor in 6 weeks' time.
But isn't this what Labour was saying anyway? I thought they'd said they weren't going to put taxes up.
They've said generically that they don't want to increase taxes on working people, that is absolutely not the same as saying, I am not going to do these things. It's very, very different in the context of a campaign.
Yeah, and also, given that there's been 2 cuts in national insurance by this Conservative government, the fact that she says she's not going to put up national insurance presumably means there's a big gap in what she's capable of spending as well.
That's right. And remember, the context to whoever wins is that the public kip of the public books is pretty disastrous, right? There's a huge amount of debt, massive, massive, massive. There have already been years of cuts to a lot of different government departments, but both the Tories and Labour say they want to get debt down under quite tough rules. If you do that, you're going to have to either raise taxes or cut services. And she's saying today, I'm not going to raise 2 of those big taxes. They are going to raise some taxes like windfall taxes and close loopholes on non-doms, which we've all heard many, many times. But in terms of the big cake, those are little crumbs, right?
So how does it work to both of you? Because I don't do a TV show. Does she come in?
You have done plenty over your time.
I know, but they've all ended.
Quizzes.
But does she? There's a reason. But does she come in thinking, today, when pushed by Koonsberg, I'm going to say I will not read my lips, no new taxes. Does she know when she's coming in, or has she surprised herself?
I mean, this has been floating around for a couple of days now, and I didn't tune into a lot of election coverage on Saturday because I was dashing around having fun. But one of the things I noted was increasing questions about Labour's fiscal policy, and they're saying they don't want to raise taxes, but they're not actually ruling it out. What was it? What was the original formulation? We've got no plans to increase taxes, or
unannounced.
What we've pledged so far doesn't require us to increase any new taxes, which is not the same as
correct
saying in future they won't raise taxes.
Rachel,
and that was starting to get quite loud, those questions about that.
I think that's right. But Rachel Reeves is a very careful and deliberate politician, and I'm fairly sure that she will have decided this morning, or even long before this morning, perhaps, that in week 1 of the campaign, that might be when they would say, we're not going to put up income tax and we're not going to put up national insurance. So I don't think it was an accident at all.
Right. So
I didn't know she was going to do it. I knew, obviously, it was a very, it was a no-brainer question to ask. Because she wants to be the Chancellor. But I didn't know that she was going to say that this morning.
And newscasters like us to go behind the process, so you didn't know she was going to say it. She, as Adam's hinting, she knew she had to clear something up. But Torsten Bell's been on Newscast with us before.
Yes, Resolution Foundation, former Treasury bod, former Labour bod, big economic brain counting person, very good at counting.
That's good on the Aston on TV.
It's good, isn't it?
Saying that borrowing... You can borrow for capital investment and tell the world that's what you're doing, and that doesn't spook people in the way that borrowing to pay for a tax cut does. So we're getting a clue by that 1 10-second answer on the TV of where to look in the next round of questions or the next Labour iteration of their policies.
That's right, and there's a lot in common between the Labour and Tory economic plans, right? They have they sort of accept the same broad turf, right?
Which is horrific turf.
Which is grim turf for anybody looking at it, right? But they accept the same broad bit. There are some differences around the edge, but one of the differences that is really important is that limit on borrowing for different kinds of spending. And if you, just to give people some context, and I know some people object to trying to use metaphors to explain this stuff, I think actually it's quite important to try to do it so you kind of understand. But borrowing for capital spending is a bit like, if you took out a mortgage to buy a house, or you do for day-to-day spending, you buy loads of new frocks on your credit card. They're not the same kind of spending.
Have you seen my credit card bill? Is that what you're saying?
Is it really big?
You've only got 1 credit card.
Do you think that that's a new kind of angle?
Well, what's interesting about election campaigns is as soon as you answer one question and shut down one thing, it actually then opens up other things, and it's like that whole whack-a-mole cliche. Because then, and you could see it playing out on Laura's show. So it's like, okay, if you're not going to raise income tax and get yourself loads more revenue, and you're only going to get yourself a little bit of extra revenue from things like the non-dom stuff, and is it called carried interest with things that private equity hedge fundies get, and increasing the tax on that a bit, then the moles that pop up are like, well, okay, yeah, these really tough spending plans that the Conservatives have penciled in, which would involve quite big cuts in departments like criminal justice and things like that. Well, then, okay, you're basically signing up to them, which will make governing quite hard and make people quite unhappy. And then the other mole that pops up, and it popped up in Laura's interview, is like, okay, people like Gordon Brown looking at social justice say, well, hang on, if this is what you're going to do, then you're going to have to carry on with policies on benefits like the two-child rule, which lots of Labour supporters and people on the left of the party are very upset with.
Including Gordon Brown, right? And he is the Chancellor who, going into 97, he said, we will stick to Tory spending plans for 2 years and we will not raise income tax. So he has been in a similar position to Reeves in some ways, being a Labour Chancellor, hopeful, trying desperately to persuade people that they can be trusted with the country's money. But in this circumstance, even he's saying, hang on, guys, you've got the priorities wrong here. The context, of course, is massively different. In that 1997, the economy was purring along. In 2024, it is absolutely not. But, you know, Labour, Keir Starmer and Rachel Reeves' answer on this is, look, we've got to have priorities. We can't do everything because the Tories smashed it all up. So their political argument goes. But it is still hard for them,
and
you know.
Because it comes hot on the heels of the interview on the Today programme with Sir Keir, when he was asked, you backed ending tuition fees when you were running to be leader of the Labour Party. You're still the same man, and now that you want to get elected, you don't.
That's right.
And he's got to have the answer that those things happened, but look what happened in the middle, a pandemic, lots of different things happened, guys. So I wonder if what actually Gordon Brown said was better than what Rachel Reeves said, because adding this little tiny phrase for 2 years is quite a different thing than we will not raise taxes, which is what she said to you on the TV this morning. She said for the whole Parliament, that's what she's implying.
And she also she just doesn't want to touch the notion of cuts. So she says, I don't want cuts. That doesn't mean there aren't going to be cuts.
Well, they're already in the pipeline. She can't stop the cuts, can she?
She could, were she to rip up the sort of overall promise that they are making to the public. But I would say, you know, bookmark the day when she said, I'm not going to raise income tax or national insurance, because if she does make it to number 11 and the economy doesn't grow convincingly, which is, of course, what they all say has to happen, but no government can guarantee that the economy will grow. You can't guarantee that there might not be another conflict, there might be another pandemic, all those things. And if you've boxed yourself in on tax cut, on not doing tax raises, you're kind of knitting yourself a straitjacket.
A knitted straitjacket, one of the nicer types of straitjacket.
It's the kind of thing you might see on Jean-Paul Gaultier catwalk.
If it's like crocheted. On another note, though, Labour's plan for workers' rights, which is called the New Deal now, isn't it?
No, it's now called Making Work Pay. We talked about this yesterday.
Oh, it was called the New Deal.
Yeah, so you can, Paddy very archly and entertainingly yesterday pointed out that something like Making Work Pay sounds more like a Conservative voter-friendly policy than a New Deal for workers, which sounds much more like a sort of union-friendly policy.
Were you convinced by her answer when you said, you've watered this down? And so, for example, you said you'd ban fire and rehire, where people get, fired and then rehired into the same job on less good terms. And actually, they're sort of not entirely banning it.
Oh, they have watered it down, because the original thing said an outright complete ban, and now it says, like, in exceptional circumstances, as long as you go through a process. What Unite the Union, who are one of their biggest backers, who've told me that they were not going to sign up to these proposals, what they say is, look, if you look at BA or you look at P&O and other places where this happened, companies were restructuring. That was their case. They said, we have to restructure or else we're going to fall over. And I don't want to impugn the motives of any particular company. So let's talk about, you know, in one generic case, companies say, we're on the edge, we have to restructure, and then they can carry on and do it. Now, Rachel Reeves was trying to say, look, those will be sort of the most exceptional of circumstances. What Unite would say back to that is, look, actually, you've put lots and lots of holes in this, and companies that are trying to play tough in dire circumstances, they'll make the most of all the loopholes.
And we're going to move on, I know, but here's something else about the tax burden. It's the highest since the 1940s. So if you really did want to go there and have some wiggle room to put it up, I mean, the Conservatives have presided over the biggest tax take since just after the war.
Yeah.
So, you know, that's been the criticism from within the right, that why are you behaving like the Labour Party? That's been the whole, and there'll be listeners on the right now, listening to us now, think, get tax down.
Absolutely.
You know, that's a big dividing line.
But this is what I love about how the public finances work, though. It's like it's a constant roller coaster, and you're never quite sure if you're going up or down. So actually, it's one of those roller coasters where you've twisted round, I think, actually, and you're like, am I up or am I
like
down?
a waltzer.
So for example, right, one of the big things that means the tax burden is going to be so high is because of the freezing of the different thresholds.
Oh no, you're going to say fiscal drag.
I was going to not say fiscal drag because we know people hate that word. I was going to explain it instead.
Would just fiscal drag involve wearing a knitted straitjacket?
I don't know. It depends on what your drag look is.
In some places, Tuesday night in Soho.
My point was going to be though, it's like, okay, so for weeks and months now, we've talked about fiscal drag, and like Jeremy Hunt gets loads of money in because he freezes the rates at which people start paying higher rates of tax, and that raises billions and billions and billions and billions over a decade. However, though, what the economists are starting to say now is like, oh, actually, inflation's fallen quite far and quite fast. So actually, the extra billions that you're going to get from the fiscal drag might actually not be as huge as people were thinking a little while ago.
Which takes you back to growth.
Yeah.
You don't get anywhere in the next parliament without growth, and the predictions are some growth, but not super soar-away growth. Right. I say it must be time to talk about national service.
It must be, but can we close with just like 3 headlines? If you've heard us all wang on about economics for the last 10 minutes and none of us are economists, shall we just say Labour, big deal, have said today they're not going to put up income tax or national insurance. The overall state of the cash that the government has got is really, really tight, and whoever wins is probably going to be some kind of cuts.
Love a bullet-pointed list.
There we are. Marvellous.
Numbered bullet-pointed list.
Talking of bullets, let's talk about the military.
Well, so the whole time I've been a journalist, and you know what, I don't know if, does this happen when you get to 44? You get a bit sort of wistful and you start thinking about looking back in your career and thinking about stories that have come up like regular as clockwork.
Oh, yeah.
National service, I think, has come up every couple of years.
Has it?
Yes. David Cameron used to bang on about it all the time.
Well, that was National Citizen Service. That's
but a version of this.
Because the thing is, the last national service men, and they were men, were discharged in 1963. So we've had a lot of years, 50 odd years, in which to consider if we're going to bring back a form of national service.
So even you didn't have to do it.
So he said he
Paddy, what was the war like?
The
Falklands War. The Falklands War.
You'll notice how silent I was when you said, when you get to 44, is it normal to think... Yeah, but just on the announcement, the Prime Minister wrote in the Mail on Sunday, I want my 2 daughters to do a form of national service. It will be mandatory for all 18-year-olds, but it's not conscription. It will include 25 days of voluntary service, and that could be lifeguarding, first aiding, but all 18-year-olds will have to do a thing if we get back.
And actually, there's even more caveats to what they're actually announcing, because actually what they've announced, if you read the press release, is a royal commission at the start of the next parliament, which is basically like just a very formal way of investigating a problem where you can bring in the great and the good to apply their minds to it. So, yeah, a royal commission to draw up plans for this national service, then a pilot scheme that would start in September 2025 with legislation to enshrine the actual finished design by the end of the next parliament. So actually the earliest you'd have a whole cohort, to use a very jargony word, of 18-year-olds doing this could potentially be, 2028?
Well, yeah, but it's still, here's the thing. It's designed to sound like a massive deal. And it's also designed, I think we can be sceptical, not cynical, sceptical enough to say this is absolutely designed to tickle the bellies of a certain kind of voter, right? Who's going to think, national service, good. That'll give kids who might be hanging around, getting into trouble, something to do. That'll get a sense of discipline. That'll get the community together. And actually talking to Tory sources about it last night, they were saying, well, yes, actually one of the things is, it will keep kids out of trouble and potential criminality. But actually what we're trying to do also is pull people together and have a kind of national spirit. But as you say, the detail of it is that it wouldn't be a very big deal for a very long time. And it is not national service as people know it, because there are only 30,000 places in the military part of it out of, I think, about 700,000 18-year-olds. So,
military service happens in around 85 countries in the world. The UK, it could easily introduce it. Other countries do. Sweden, North Korea, as a friendly example. However, However, I spoke to a military man, Tim Cross. He said, look, it's really hard to turn it on after all these years of having it off, of not having national service, excuse me. Can we do that again? It's really hard to turn the key back on for national service after it ended officially in 1960. So you have got the James Cleverly, the Home Secretary, explaining the thinking. And let's have a listen.
Too many young people living in their own a bubble, whether it be a digital bubble or a social bubble. And we want to get back to the situation where people are mixing with young people from different areas, different economic groups, different religions, to try and find a way of addressing the kind of fragmentation.
What's interesting about lots of things are interesting about this, is one, how they're going to pay for it. They say a combination of tax avoidance, which governments forever tried to save money from tax avoidance. It's also going to come from what's called the Shared Prosperity Fund, which is basically the levelling up cash that was promised to towns around the country. And that is now going to be spent on something else, not on town centres and filling up potholes and other things that communities might have wanted as part of that gear, part of that promise. The other thing, I think it kind of conveys a message, actually. Here he starts talking about fragmentation and society sort of having something wrong about it. And I think politically it's quite an interesting message. It's also not necessarily a great message if you've been in charge for 14 years to say, actually, I think things are quite fragmented and young people don't really feel part of society.
Yeah, I mean, because the thing is, we go back to a theme that we should actually explore in greater depth, which is that there's a big win in optimism. And actually, the shining city on the hill is a good way in history to take voters with you. That's kind of what the appeal of Attlee was in 1945, and he got nearly a 12% swing, beating Winston Churchill.
In a July election.
So, I mean, if all of them are going to doom us into the ballot box, they're missing a lesson from history. I'm sorry if I no one wants to be taught a lesson by me, but it's just that over the years you do hear a lot of experienced politicians and historians say, give us a tune to hum. You can't just tell me I was fragmented. Oh, it's all awful. I mean, why should I go into the booth if it's all awful?
Yeah, it's interesting, isn't it? It's interesting. And you've got these two classic campaign messages that we've already seen. You've got the Tories basically saying, don't risk it, don't risk it, don't risk it. And then you've got Labour saying, change, change, change. And in 2024, those are probably the two most traditional campaign messages out there. One is, don't trust the other guy, it's scary. And the other is, we're really nice and the world's going to change. And that's basically where we're at.
To WhatsApp, to round us off, we had a WhatsApp from somebody who didn't leave their name, which is a shame.
Shall we invent one?
Also,
let's call them...
Mavis.
Mavis Straitjacket. I don't know, that's the word that just popped into my head. I don't know anyone whose surname is Straitjacket, but never mind.
That sounds like the product of one of those games. If you take your first pet's name and your mum's maiden name, what name do you come up with? Anyway, I'll be quiet.
Let's not get into Laura's porn star name. Because that's that game. That's just how
that
you
is
come
that
up.
game.
Yeah,
it's
let's
really
not get
boring.
into
No, there is a podcast in that. I mean,
it's Ben Robertson. I mean, that just doesn't work, does it?
Anyway.
This is a diary item, and I know the editor's going to take it out.
Right, anyway, let me read out the WhatsApp from whoever it's from Mavis Straitjacket.
Too long.
Right, Mavis writes,
Oh.
I reckon that 10% of MPs who've announced they're standing down have reversible names like Stuart Andrew. In other words, a surname that could be a first name. This is working on the assumption that Bob Stewart and Bob Neal are called Robert. This seems a very high proportion. Who could be next? So we then did our own bit of number crunching and we looked at all the MPs who are standing down. And we've got Stuart Andrew, Bob Stewart, Bob Neal, Lucy Allen, Michael Ellis, Alistair Jack, Brandon Lewis, Wayne David, Caroline Lucas, Lisa Cameron, Trudy Harrison, Sajid Javid, Andrew Percy, Douglas Ross, Theresa May, Joe Gideon. All people who have surnames that could also be a first name. And we work out that that is probably 19% of the MPs who are standing down have so-called reversible names.
That's massive. I mean,
that's what we spent our morning doing. Well, you two were like broadcasting to the nation, holding people to account. We were just going through a list of names going, oh, do you know anyone called Harrison with a first name? And then
that's amazing.
Can I just pick you up on one? I mean, I'm really impressed.
Please do.
People will think that
Transparency.
Theresa May.
Yeah.
Do we know many people with the surname Theresa other than mother?
No, but it's I think it's more than... I don't know if that was her surname.
No, but it's just, I thought, because obviously...
No, I think it's more that it's surnames you can have as a first name rather than truly 100% reversible.
Well, that's a different game then.
Because this is a high standard, you know, Sunday's newscast. It's all very well
fine.
coming
Maybe
in with a list.
18% of MPs
I mean,
are standing
that
there.
might do on a Tuesday or Wednesday.
I thought you were
That
gonna
kind of, we've got a new fact check strand on my programme on Sunday mornings.
I came a cropper on the fact check strand, be hard to say, with my martini claim yesterday.
I thought you were going to say, do you know anyone who's got the first name May?
No, I didn't say that.
Because I was going to say May Martin, the comedian.
Yes, I mean, I know a lot of people called May. And I know a few
May's
Junes.
a very pretty name.
I know a few Junes.
April? Yeah.
I mean, I think I could go on. Have we got time to fill?
I know someone called Autumn. I always think that's a very pretty name.
I feel, can I say that it's a joy for me to have Adam and Laura reunited? I mean, professionally it's quite challenging because obviously I don't want it to be better. But I mean, it's just lovely, and it's lovely for you to come in on Sunday because you do all of this for us all the time.
Thanks for
It's been very
having me.
nice to have you.
I've done my weekend voluntary service.
And you got to wear your new T-shirt on TV.
This is actually my friend's T-shirt that I borrowed as a little reference to our favourite film.
That's sweet.
And it must be the end because we're now doing
Please,
T-shirts
dear
as worn
God.
by Adam.
Our fashion item, the new Newscast fashion item.
Oh, yeah.
You're wearing your lipstick jacket, though. I call it the lipstick jacket, even though it's not kisses.
Oh,
I always
no,
think
it's
it's
leopard.
kisses. Yeah.
Oh, it's leopard. I mean, there's so many red leopards around, aren't there? Yeah, it's leopard.
I feel very much that listeners will say thank you for what you've done.
But you've done enough.
We've done enough. So it's goodbye.
Thank God for that.
Bye.
Newscast from the BBC.